Ladies and gentlemen, the GNU is firmly in place, but is corruption under Ramaphosa still continuing unabated? Before we get on to the main news story, can I please once again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, share it with your friends on WhatsApp. These things really do help. And if you really want to support me in the work I do, buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So before we get on to the main news story, let's just get some of the smaller, minor news stories that you might have missed off the table. The first one is that apparently the news is South Africa missed a recession in the last economic quarter. This was thanks to an economic growth of 0.4%. Don't know about you, but if you told me that my personal money grew by 0.4%, I'd be like, okay, cool. Thanks. In other news, the Bank of England's governor says that South Africa's inflation rate remains stable. But you see, the problem is that it hasn't remained stable for long enough to justify the cutting of interest rates. He says that if the inflation rate continues to remain low, maybe next time they'll cut it. You know, trust me, bro. We'll cut it eventually. On to some genuinely good news. Apparently petrol is going to decrease by 92 cents and diesel is going to decrease by 1 rand 5 cents. This means that the cost of fuel will now be at the lowest level it's been since 2023. So on to some genuinely big news. Well, the first is actually around the ANC in Gauteng. So Gauteng actually hasn't had any form of ANC governance since 2021. But you see, the ANC has been on a ruthless march to basically regain all the metros. And it's been very interesting to watch because the ANC, as we all know, in Johannesburg, installed a puppet mayor in the form of El Jamar. And because of the disputes that they've had with the EFF, that has now collapsed, leading to whole new political realignments, with Herman Mashaba's party, Action SA, siding with the ANC, even though they said they'd never work with the ANC. Well, that has meant that the ANC are now the leaders of many of the metros, with Swane being the last one to fall. And you see, fall it may do, because at the moment, Mr. Brooks is only there thanks to the involvement of Action SA. But Action SA says they're tired of the DA and they're ready to side with the ANC, which would mean that all the metros in Gauteng would have finally returned to the ANC. You can let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. And on to the main news story, and this is the news story of the Justice Minister. Now, it's important to highlight that, the Justice Minister. You know, the minister involved of law and order? Well, news is that apparently she benefited from VBS. Yep, would you know it? And the news reporting around this is rather interesting because apparently this all revolves around the time when she was the mayor of Polokwane. Now, for those of you who don't know, Polokwane invested a large amount of municipal funds with VBS. And apparently the mayor at the time was given a 24.2 million rand kickback for investing the money in VBS. I would say allegedly, because there hasn't yet been any real evidence of this. Additionally, she was also given a R500,000 rand loan to buy a coffee shop in Sandton. Now, this in itself is not insidious. In fact, that's exactly what the bank was set up to do, allow people to buy things like coffee shops. So the question really becomes, well, was it a genuine loan? Well, according to some of the news, no, it wasn't. She claims it was paid back, but there's no loan agreements and there's no proof of repayment of loan. So as a result, well, the ANC have done the usual thing. They've summoned her to the Integrity Commission. I mean, she's still Minister of Justice, right? I mean, obviously, that's not going to change until she's proven innocent or guilty or never tried. We all know how this goes. But in any case, Fikile Mbalula came out and said if any of the money has been received at the ANC, money from VBS, then the ANC would pay it back. And to that, I would say, Mr. Mbalula, the ANC are not dumb. So what they've effectively done is used various fronting organizations to redirect the funds to in order to gain access to the funds without directly incriminating the main parties. This is what we've seen with the EFF, specifically around Floyd Shivambu's family involvement with VBS. This is not new, and I doubt that the ANC would have committed the flaw of having the monies directed to itself. So whilst a lovely promise, it's also an empty promise, and one made knowing full well that you haven't got any of the money. Some of the fronting companies may do. On to other news, and that is the news around Pieter de Toet. So Pieter is kind of famous because he writes a lot of books about Zuma. He's not a fan of Zuma. In fact, he's actually written 2 books so far around some of Zuma's shenanigans, specifically the Stellenbosch Mafia and the ANC billionaires. Well, he's now written a new book called Super Cadres. Now, why this book is specifically interesting is because it involves a number of interviews with Gordon. And if you know our approach on Gordon, he's a rather crooked, corrupt commie. It also involves some interviews with Trevor Manuel. And in it, it is alleged that basically Gordon describes Jacob Zuma as having a degree of recklessness around him, basically because he did things plunging the financial markets into chaos without any real care. According to him, all the economic decline in South Africa can be attributed to Jacob Zuma and the decisions that he made. So he actually goes on a little bit further and uses some of the testimony of Trevor Manuel to explain why. And it's the why that becomes important. And specifically, what he highlights is that during Thabo Mbeki's time in office, he alleges that Thabo Mbeki was very fiscally conscious. They would sit and debate policy for many, many hours on how to create a degree of economic stability within the country. Jacob Zuma wasn't so interested, he said. So you see, what typically tended to happen is that Thabo Mbeki put a stable framework of governance in place, and Jacob Zuma came in and put a framework of spending consume. Now, according to Trevor Manuel, it was not uncommon to actually pitch up to a meeting with Jacob Zuma, and Jacob Zuma, after many hours of making you wait, would say, I'm rather tired, I don't really want to continue the meeting, can you go home and come back tomorrow? Now, this is interesting that he would use this as an explanation, because this is actually what we see currently with Jacob Zuma's current engagements. Quite often he has an engagement he's scheduled to attend, and he just doesn't pitch, or he says, I'm too tired to pitch today. So while this was problematic, is that ultimately financial decisions or economic decisions that should have been made never kind of got made, which led to the ultimate collapse in the country's fiscus position. And according to Trevor Manuel and Gordon, the height of this was actually 2015. According to them, if you ever want to track back to the year that South Africa declined, that's the year you want to look at. According to him, this becomes really, really interesting because you see, he says, if you were to look and you were to summarize everybody's reign, you would say that Mbeki's reign was that of implementing stability, but Jacob Zuma's reign was that of assaulting the rule of law. But most interesting, he says that all of this was abetted by the involvement of Cyril Ramaphosa, because, according to him, Cyril Ramaphosa resided over the appointment of all the individuals that were ultimately employed to destroy the state itself. The net result is that Gordon described the entire situation as, and I quote, a degree of frustration that you felt really lost back then. And he says, we were all lost, but the problem is we all knew we were in a very serious situation. And this ultimately is because he could see that the national interest was declining. And this is interesting because he also says he stayed on because of the national interest and he wanted the country to really, really get on the right track, which is odd because everywhere that Gordon's gone has just failed, like miserably. More interesting, Gordon says that he only stayed in politics because of his moral fiber. I'm not really sure what that moral fiber is. Maybe somebody could let me know in the comment section below, because I still haven't figured it out. And on to some other news around Cyril Ramaphosa, and that's he's currently in China. He's currently in China asking them to buy more African goods, which is ironic because the Chinese are hosting the African countries in order to ask them to buy more Chinese goods. So everybody's trying to flog goods at each other. And why is this happening? Well, it's happening because China is starting to see its goods fall out of favor with the West, because the West want to exert economic pressure on them to not produce, well, mass loads of junk that they can sell to the rest of the world for cheap. This is actually something that we don't want in South Africa, which is why we're currently engaging in action against Shine and Temu, both of which are flooding the markets with cheap junk. So how will this actually resolve itself? Well, actually it's going to be rather interesting to see. Already John Steenhuisen has announced that apparently the Agriculture Ministry has signed some memorandums of understanding with the Chinese Communist Party, I mean the Chinese government, one and the same really, to ultimately get more South African food into the Chinese markets, which would be good for trade. You can let me know what you think of the story in the comment section below. And on to some final news stories. Well, apparently a church in France that was created in 1854, survived 2 world wars, has suddenly gone up in flames. Yeah, this happens quite a lot in France. France has a lot of diversity and a lot of cultural enrichment, and it is currently seeing at least 2 churches burnt every week. In fact, there's not really that many churches left in France. One wonders why. Could possibly be that the diversity is enriching the churches. Talking of good enrichment on diversity, something rather interesting is happening in England. And that is, apparently the Anglo-Saxons don't exist anymore. Yeah, I mean, they've been there for centuries, but apparently we want to write them out of history now, because if we leave them there, according to academics at Cambridge, the top tier university that everybody kind of wants to send their kids to, apparently we're going to get rid of the Anglo-Saxons to decolonize the curriculum. And the reason for this is because if we include the Anglo-Saxons, there's a degree of nationalism that remains in the curriculum and makes people extremists. Yeah, I don't know either. You can let me know in the comment section below. Talking of cultural enrichment, the UK government is continuing to discuss more censorship laws. And during one of those debates, they were asked, what exactly is Islamophobia? Could somebody provide a definition? Please bear in mind, an definition does actually exist. In any case, this was the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State please explain to me and the House what the government's definition of Islamophobia actually is? Secretary of State.
Well, I say to the honourable member that a new definition must be given careful consideration so that it comprehensively reflects multiple perspectives and considers potential implications for different communities. And we're actively considering our approach to Islamophobia, including definitions, and we'll provide further updates on this in due course.
And so what you can actually see from the clip is they haven't got a freaking clue what it means, even though the actual definition does exist in law. But this is typical of the British governments at the moment. Just redefine things to encapsulate everything, and then just shut up all your opponents. It's a good strategy, I suppose. In any case, that's it from me. I don't really have anything more to add. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I will leave you with this AI-generated clip. It's meant to be comedy, laugh at it at least. But apparently it's the debate between Sir Keir, two-tier Keir, and Donald Trump.
It's Big Dick Don here. I'm hearing rumors that you're locking people up for posting memes. What the fuck are you playing at, you dirty commie cocksucker?
Yes, but because they are far-right thugs saying hurty words and upsetting people.
Listen, I'm going to stick my foot far right up your ass.
You can't do that to me. My dad was a tool maker.
Well, he certainly made a tool for the World Economic Forum.
Don't you bring Davos into this. I'll tell my mummy.
Listen, you slimy bastard, I'll own everything and love it.
She worked in the NHS.
Yes, well, my mom, who was probably the greatest mom there ever has been, came from Scotland. She always told me, Donnie, don't ever let those commie bastards take over the home country. So when I do get re-elected, I'm going to invade your fucking country and make Britain great again.